Hello. Alrighty, close that. All right, let's we'll jump in here. How was that? Have most of you written it so far? How was it? Okay, nothing too. You weren't shocked, appalled, deathly afraid? No. Okay. I told you it's usually not that bad. All right. So obviously today, pretty truncated class. We'll have about a little over an hour, and then we'll call it a day. I wish I could just give you the whole class off, but you don't want to write a 3-hour exam, and I can't. It's such a short semester that I can't afford to give you the rest of the day off. So, all right. So we're going to talk about work or youth in the labor market today. Might take just a little bit longer than today's class, but it's a pretty short unit as well. Okay, so, and nothing, I know lots of people are probably going to catch up with it online later, so nothing too fancy today, just your sort of basic structure. Okay. I guess I'll leave that up for a second. And you'll let me know if there's no audio if your friend texts you. All right. Okay, so there's a bit of history, I guess, to talk about when we talk about youth in the labor market. Because in a sense, what we've talked about so far in the course kind of applies, right? And definitely when we're talking about, say, the baby boomers and the silents coming into the workforce, right, as they get out of high school or university, college, the silents and the baby boomers were treated to a really particular and really great sort of job market, right? And like I've said, and I know I stress this and I talk about it too much, but the changes in the kind of youth job market are deeply linked to the changes in the economy overall and the kind of history. The boomers, the silents, they come out of high school and they're entering into this period, in the post-Second World War, post-1945 kind of world, where you have essentially an economy in Canada and the US that is raging hot, right? It is going to remain extremely hot for, a solid 25 years, a quarter century, really of really super hot economy. So what does that do? Well, it means that your silents and your boomers coming out of high school and college are entering a world where, the economy is expanding really rapidly. There's tons of jobs. The economy is generating more jobs than it has people. So you have labor shortages. And so the workers that enter this economy do really, really well. Right? And this is why, if we look at the boomers, they own a lot of stuff today, right? They own houses, they own boats, they own cabins. Excuse me. They own all of these. That was some synchronized coughing we had there. They own all of these things because they got into the economy and they started making money really, really quickly. This, in a lot of ways, kind of overheats so there's a bunch of stuff that happens. What you get is a lot of spending, a really prolonged period of growth, which will end up kind of overheating the economy by the 1970s. So there's so much money in the economy, people have so much disposable income, they start spending, and it eventually will drive up inflation, along with a bunch of stuff that happens in the 1970s. There's some, really bad monetary policy from governments. Right, they're spending too much money on social welfare programs. What is the other? So that leads to inflation as well. Pretty low interest rates allows people to borrow a lot of money. And I'm thinking of what's the other thing? Oh, the hot economy. The Arab oil embargoes and the oil crisis that starts in 1973. Right, so a bunch of states in the Middle East, the Arab states that control a lot of the world oil supply, get upset with the United States for its support of Israel, and they start what's called the Arab oil embargo, and this drives the price of energy way, way up. So, okay, one more thing. Sorry, there's one more thing. By the time we reach the end of the 1960s and the beginning of the 1970s, a lot of the economies of Europe, and particularly, it'll start in Japan, but then you'll see places like Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan. There's 4 of those Asian states, and then eventually China, really come on board in the global economy, right? Europe and Japan rebuild after the end of the Second World War. It takes about 20 years to fully rebuild and get their economies really going, but once they do, it's a big competitor to Canada and the US, especially Japan. And then you get all of these Asian economies starting to come on board in the 70s and 80s, and it creates a lot of competition. So, and it's places like Japan initially, and then those 4 East Asian countries that I listed end up being a lot cheaper in terms of labor. So a lot of companies start offshoring production to those places. So by the 1980s, when we get to Gen X, one of the things that starts to happen is a huge contraction in manufacturing. So manufacturing jobs, those great jobs, where I described Johnny graduates from high school, he goes to the Ford factory, he says to the foreman, hey, I'd really love to work in this factory and make a lot of money. And the foreman's like, great, I need workers and you are a body, so we'll train you. All of that comes to a screaming halt, starting at the end of the 1960s, but in the beginning of the 1970s, right? It becomes much harder. There's far fewer manufacturing jobs available. So for blue collar workers, it's a huge contraction. For white collar and college educated workers, other things are sort of happening. And I get to this on another slide, but I'll just kind of give you the trailer, and then I'll explain it in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. Because of the overspending of government overspending and creation of too many social service programs and the massive expansion of the state bureaucracy, governments are facing, sort of bankruptcy, right? Their debt to GDP ratios are very much out of whack. So they owe too much money compared to how much their economies generate. And you get a bunch of, shall we say, monetary and economic theories, mostly coming out of places like the University of Chicago, but some coming out of Harvard, that say that, once you reach a certain debt to GDP ratio, it's going to crater your economy. And so governments start to cut back on social welfare services and shrink the size of government in general, right? So this really starts kind of at the end of the 1970s with the elections of Ronald Reagan in the US, of Margaret Thatcher in the United Kingdom, and then just a touch later, at the beginning of the 1980s in Canada, we get Brian Mulroney and the conservative government of Brian Mulroney, all of whom try to cut down the size of government. And what this does is it takes a lot of the great white-collar jobs that university graduates were getting coming out of university in the public service, right? So people would go and they would, get a great job in the public service. I forgot to turn this on. There we go. In the public service, right? So they will go work for the government, get some experience, or have great jobs with pensions and benefits. A lot of those jobs go away. And what you end up with is a big shift in the economy in general, away from manufacturing, away from making things, into the service industry, and then a cut down in kind of the number of government jobs, leading a lot of white-collar workers to end up in the service industry as well. So Gen X enters the economy, right? So they're, born kind of mid-1960s. So the oldest of them are starting to try and get their jobs in the 1980s. And what they find is that what's available to them isn't what was available to their parents, right? That suddenly those great manufacturing jobs are gone. Those great government jobs are gone. And what they have is service industry jobs in, retail, hospitality, call centers, other things, at the lower tiers, things like the growing childcare industry, beauty services, all that kind of stuff. That is sort of where and other kinds of service provision, but typically at the lower tier of the service industry, right? So not things like computer programming, because that won't come in until the 1990s. Some engineering, but the growth of that is again in the 1990s. So they have not that many alleys into great, well-paying work with good benefits and pensions and all of that stuff. And so the Gen X coins the economy that they come into and the jobs that they get, McJobs, right? Which I finally get to the title of this slide after only a 12-minute preamble. So they come in to the economy, and the jobs that are available to them, in a very stagnant economy. And this is one of the problems. Through the 1970s, the US and Canadian economies are incredibly stagnant, right? It's a period that they call, and I think I've mentioned this before, the period of stagflation, right? Of stagnation and inflation, where the economy doesn't really grow. I'll write that down for you, if I can. Stagflation. And this is a really bad time in general, right? in most places. It's a really, really bad time. There's not a lot of job creation because the economy is stagnant and it's either growing really slowly or in recession. And there's a ton of inflation going on. And things are so bad, right? And I mean, probably some of your parents are probably Gen X, and I don't know if they remember this. I know certainly some older people who are baby boomers remember this, in the kind of mid-1970s, right? In the 1970s, weird things were happening. Energy prices were super high. People couldn't afford to fill up their cars. And even things like, in parts of the United States, you could only fill up your car every other day, right? So gas stations would be closed 3 to 4 days a week, and you just couldn't fill up your cars because there was such an energy shortage. And there were things like hour-long or 2-hour-long lines at the gas station for people to fill up their cars, right? And so people thought, this is a weird period, that the West was done, right? That the West and its economies were done. They were collapsing. And, ironically, people were like, the Soviet model, that's the way to go, and communism, right? So, we know how that turned out eventually. Now, this will reverse in the 1980s. The neoliberal politics and policies of, say, Reagan, Thatcher, Mulrooney helped to alleviate some of these problems, but it takes a long time for things to get back. So, yeah, the world that the Gen Xers are coming into in terms of work is one that's really, really stagnant, right? And, even now, manufacturing jobs never came back. The size of government has grown quite a bit. So there are government jobs available, again, to people, but it's never been at the same proportion that it was, say, in the 1950s and 60s. And so the world that, say, millennials and Gen Z enter is still one where a lot of their first opportunities are in McJobs. Okay, so what's a McJob? I should define it. Typically a job in the lower tier of the service industry, right? Retail, hospitality, childcare, being three of the big kind of parts of that industry. Now increasingly delivery, delivery, truck driving. Sorry, I have a weird thought. So weirdly, you want to see how pervasive this is. The number one, and this is true to this day, employer of men without a college education, so men with high school or less, is trucking. So driving your thing from one place to another, right? That is the number one employer of high school educated or high school or less, men with high school education or less, is truck driving. So when Elon Musk launches his self-driving trucks, that's going to be an economic crisis too. But this is right in that low tier of the service industry. Okay, so what is it? So low-end jobs, low quality, right? They're not great jobs. They're not probably the jobs that you grow up being like, what I really want to do is be a hairdresser, do people's nails, drive truck, be a janitor, right? Work in retail. It's probably not every person's dream. So they tend to be kind of, thought of as low quality jobs. Increasingly, as we get into the 1970s and 80s, a lot of companies go into this corporate and franchise model. And so, instead of local businesses, you're increasingly dealing with big corporations like McDonald's that have established systems that they just slot people into, right? And they give them sort of minimal training, right? If you've ever worked at a fast food place, you'll recognize this model pretty inherently, right? You're given some minimal training, and you're told to do a job within the burger assembly or food assembly kind of system. And you're as easy, if you don't show up to work, someone else does it. If you quit, they find someone else to do it. You're neither, invaluable, nor do you have any skills that are particularly hard for them to replace. So you're kind of a cog in a machine, and typically, and though, no real possibility of further growth. Now, a lot of companies, like McDonald's and I'll tell you about in a second, place where I worked, will say, oh, if you hang around long enough, work hard, you could be a manager or even a regional manager for this company and make lots and lots of money. But realistically, right, there's very few, it's sort of like a pyramid. There's very few of those regional manager and district manager jobs and a lot of the flip burger jobs down here. And not everybody is going to be able to move up. Okay, so when we talk about young people, Gen X and more, we see that increasing share of them getting a college or university education. And yet, as they enter the economy, it's still really difficult for them to get good paying jobs with great benefits that have upward mobility, right? Those jobs become increasingly sort of difficult to get, or stability, right? Where you're going to be able to make a career out of them. The other thing I guess I should mention, the Gen Xers, one of the complaints that Gen X and to a lesser extent millennials have made is that the baby boomers, right? And if you remember, the baby boomers are that huge demographic bubble, and as they move up in the age scale, their fat part of that demographic bubble just moves along with them. Well, one of the complaints Gen X had, and millennials again to a lesser extent, is that the baby boomers, because they were such a big demographic cohort, they were sort of like, I don't know if you want to think of the economy as like a pipe, they clogged that pipe and they just kind of stayed stuck, right? They took up all the good jobs and they never left, right? They stayed there, until we're now seeing sort of a big push, like post-pandemic, of most of the boomers retiring. But the boomers hung around in the economy, taking up a lot of the really good paying jobs, professional jobs, for a really, really long time. So they left people with just the jobs at the bottom, entry-level jobs to kind of do, and not a lot of upward mobility because they got into those jobs. They survived all the recessions because they were already ensconced, and it left Gen X in a period or in a kind of state where they struggled economically in a lot of ways. And so, amongst other things, Gen X has been called the sandwich generation, right? Because they're sandwiched between two really big demographic cohorts, the boomers and the millennials, right? Which are both bigger cohorts than them. And in a lot of ways, they had to sort of suffer the boomers being in their way and then the millennials coming and trying to take, their place as well as they sort of sit between the two. So they're kind of sandwiched between big cohorts, and that's often an awkward place to be. I mean, people don't really talk about McJobs anymore. I think people kind of shifted more to the vocabulary of dead-end jobs. But definitely when we talk about millennials and where they entered the workforce, and this is true of Gen Z as well, a lot of jobs in the service industry. Okay, so, ta-da. So I graduated from university in 2005. Basically kind of early in the kind of millennial wave, but still kind of suffering from an economy that was suffering in a lot of ways from the same things that had afflicted Gen X, because I'm really close demographically to Gen X, and I ended up working here. I think if Dante had written The Inferno in 2005, he would have written working at Enterprise Rent-A-Car as the fourth ring of hell. Because I worked there for 3 solid years. 3 years for me working at Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And I still have enduring trauma. And I will say, like, just a few weeks ago, I had a nightmare where I was working there, and I haven't worked there since 2008. So, it stings a lot. But this was my job. And McDonald's, no, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, I think really, and they still do this, because I occasionally rent a car. I like to chat with the people who work there and just see if it's still the same place. And it kind of embodies this McJob type of world that the millennials and Gen X had to endure. Okay, so what are some things that make it like that? Okay, so one thing, long hours. So my typical workday when I worked there is I start at 5:30 and I worked till about 6:30 at night, sometimes 7 p.m., right? So I was working, 12-ish hour days, because I had a 30-minute lunch break and a couple of coffee breaks in there. But, I was at work for, the better part of 13 hours. It was salaried, because they started you out as this was my favorite term, MT, which stood for management trainee. And because management, they know how to corporations figured out how to jangle with corporate law because management doesn't get overtime, right? So basically, if you're part of management, you're professional, you're on a salary. So I had my base salary. Once I begrudgingly accepted a position as assistant manager, I made salary, which went down. It was less than a management trainee plus commission, which was super fun. A story for a different time. I screwed them over on my commission because the two people who ran the branch I got put at before me were incompetent morons. And once my boss and I cleared out their incompetence, we tripled the size of our car fleet, and suddenly, my commission percentage, I was making the most commission of an assistant manager in Alberta, which was fun. And then they tried to move me, and I said no, because they can renegotiate your commission when they move you. And I was like, I think I'm good here. See, I knew I was quitting anyway. Anyway, so they do things like that, And then I remember, my favorite thing, when we did the training in Red Deer, because their corporate office is in Calgary, so all the management trainees converge on the great metropolis of Red Deer to train in between, Edmonton and Calgary. And they played the video where they told us the history of Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And I'm like, this is like a cult, right? It was named after the USS Enterprise, on which the founder of the company, Jack Taylor, served. I didn't care. But, apparently they changed it from Executive Rent-A-Car to Enterprise Rent-A-Car at some point. I'm like, I thought it was named after the ship from Star Trek. Your story is less cool. And then it was, they talked about this great management structure, right? And they're like, your manager started out as a management trainee and worked his way up. And then it's like, I can't remember his name now. I can see his face, but he also had what was his name? I think it was Jeff Parker. He also had a nasty habit of sleeping with female management trainees and then promoting them. But anyway, which we all knew, and it was super fun. Anyway, and you can end up as a group rental manager or even running the company, because our current CEO started out as a management trainee in Austin, Texas. And it was like, super fun. I don't believe a word of it, but I still worked there for 3 years. Do you know what? Can I tell you something random? Unhappy employees stay on average 6 months to a year longer at a job than happy employees. And it's the most random thing, but I'm absolutely that person, because I'm like, you know what? I'm going to leave when I'm good and freaking ready. You can't make me by making this job miserable, because I'm sort of that person. Anyway, right, so this is like the classic McJob, right? Oh, the other one, and my favorite. They would only hire people with 4-year degrees. And I could never figure out why. Because, okay, the other thing, they did make you wear a suit every day with a white shirt. I'm just like reliving my horrors. You had to wear a white shirt Monday through Thursday. On Friday, you could wear a blue shirt. That was like, you could really let loose. And on Saturday, because none of the managers came to check, I just never wore a tie. But every other day, I could still tie a tie in the dark, like without looking, because I would get up at like 4:30 in the morning and I didn't want to wake my wife. So I would tie my tie in the dark in our walk-in closet. And I can still do it without looking. It's just boom, 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 done. Anyway, so yeah, you had to wear a suit. Women's attire was a little bit more flexible. But man, you had to wear a suit, and a lot of it involved, writing up contracts, which is basically filling out an online form, and washing cars. So I washed a lot of muddy F-150s that smelled like weed in a suit. So, really bad job. And why they wanted people with a 4-year degree, it was to make it seem more professionalized, right? Like this was a career. And this is and this is why I say this is the epitome of a McJob in lots of ways. And again, it was like you can get promoted to assistant manager, branch manager, group rental, or area manager, group rental man. I still remember all the steps. Anyway, this was my McJob, and as you can tell, I'm still kind of mad about it. I don't know why. It didn't hurt me. Okay. Except, 4 years of my life, or 3 years of my life. And constant nightmares, still. Between that one and the I'm an undergraduate and I forgot to submit an assignment in a class that I never attended, right? It's like the day of the final exam. I haven't been to any classes. I just forgot I was taking the class. I still have that nightmare too. I don't know why. Okay, I'm just waiting for the day marking exams. That's going to be my nightmare. Okay. That's tomorrow. Okay, so youth employment. Generally speaking, younger workers are more vulnerable to changes in what's called market conditions or aggregate economic conditions, right? So when the economy, goes up, a lot of young people get hired. When it goes down, they both struggle to find employment and more of them get let go. And the reasons are pretty straightforward. They have less experience, they have less social and cultural capital, they're less capable typically than older workers, and companies will typically hold on to their most experienced and competent workers during downswings, with some exceptions, right? Sometimes you get it where I think like my wife's uncle, who was an accountant at a big oil firm, and during one recession, they let him go because they're like, wow, you make a lot of money. We could hire 3 junior accountants for less than your salary. So that can happen, but mostly, they want to keep their most experienced people. So less hiring of new employees during downswings. Obviously, when the economy's bad, companies hire fewer people, right? Companies don't take risks. They try to ride out the recessions where they can. And even, internships tend to decline during economic downturns. So even unpaid ones, right? So I have a friend of mine. He used to run an engineering firm, which he's now out of the engineering business. But he used to run an engineering firm, and one of the things they had is co-ops, right? The engineers will always tell you about their great co-ops, all that jazz. But during the big downswing that started in 2015, he had been hiring co-op students prior to that, and which are basically paid internships. And he said he stopped doing it during that downswing because it was great fun to have some university student in your office, and they were very cheap, but he had nothing for them to do, right? Because there was less work. So yeah, internships, paid and unpaid, will decline during downswings as well. What am I doing for time? Okay. Okay. So this is a term, right? Entitlement or entitled. This particularly got tossed at the millennials as the millennials were coming into the workplace, right? When millennials came into the workplace, we talked about, Gene Twenge's kind of thoughts on millennials, right? That they had, they were raised by the boomers, right? In a lot of this self-actualization, self-help kind of culture. And they were told that they're really, really special, right? You are unique snowflake number 572. There is no other snowflake like you. And, they're told that they could do anything. When they got into the market, though, weirdly, the baby boomers reacted really, really poorly to millennials coming into the workplace in lots of ways. And they got tagged with, being entitled for a couple of reasons, right? So millennials have sort of different, and I'll show you in a sec kind of what this looks like, have different kind of workplace values than the boomers had, and a different kind of orientation towards work. The boomers was very much like bear down when you're young, right? Work 1,000,000 hours when you're really young, and then reap the rewards of more vacation, and all more vacation, more pay, less hard work, shorter hours once you get older. The millennials sort of had these expectations when they came into the market, and the buzzword for millennials, and I remember this because coming into the job market, when millennials were sort of newly coming into it, the big buzzwords were work-life balance. And I remember this because every company I applied for was always like, yeah, here we really stress work-life balance. Sorry, I remember Enterprise Rent-A-Car stressed work-life balance when I was working there 65 hours a week on my crappy salary. So that was, super fun. Or on my days off where they would call me in and be like, we absolutely need you. I was like, no want. Work-life balance, right? And I think partially as a reaction to the excesses of the baby boomers, right? Having seen their parents working incredibly long hours, kind of in some cases working themselves into an early grave. Millennials had kind of different expectations. And this has kind of sent a perpetual, shockwave through the kind of working world. And I think this is hilarious because I have a good friend. Her name is Paige. She's an executive now at an oil company. And a few years ago, she's a year younger than me, so she's very clearly a millennial. And she was like, I hate working with millennials. She's like, they're so lazy and entitled. They don't want to climb the ladder, right? They just expect everything right away. And I'm like, oh, Paige, you're a millennial. And she's like, what do you mean? And I explained her what. She's like, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. And I'm like, okay. But yeah, this is the stereotype, right? And it's continued on where people perceive young people and young workers particularly as lazy, right? And especially lazy in the sense that they want everything all at the beginning, right? They want, good wages. They don't want to, take their time at the bottom and work their way up. They want something for nothing. And then when you actually look at it, it seems to be like a cultural attitude now that haunts young people that has little merit. When you actually talk to young people and you look at the social science work on it, they don't mind working hard. They don't mind, climbing the ladder, but they do stress kind of different things. And they talk about work in ways that are slightly different than older generations. And it's, I don't know, they all sound like people who just came back from Europe on an exchange. And they're like, in Europe, they work to live. They don't live to work. And that's, sort of Gen Z's attitude, and millennials as well. It's like they want a balance between work and life, right? And this kind of rubs the wrong way. Even if it's mostly just kind of about semantics, people have a relatively bad reaction to it. And that said, when we talk about youth wages, comparatively and earning overall, right, we talked about this when we talked about millennials, young people are earning less at the beginning of their careers, right? They're starting later and they're earning less. They catch up by the time they reach about 40. But until then, they earn less. And so some people have said maybe it's just young people, not wanting to work as hard because they don't see as much economic benefit. Okay. That was not a lot of slides. Okay, so changes in employment patterns. Okay, so one of the things that we kind of stressed, right, when we were in talking about the cultural world of generations, is that there have been changes in employment patterns, right? Younger people work less than their older counterparts did, right? So they start working relatively later. So, only when we talk about Gen Z, only about 18% of Gen Z that are 15 to 17 were employed in 2018. That's the most recent number I could find. This comes from Pew Research, compared with 27% of millennial teens in 2002, right? So basically we've seen, a solid 9% decline in the number of 15 to 17-year-olds who are employed, from millennials to Gen Z. When we talk about Gen Xers, it was 41% of Gen Xers in 1986 who were working for pay, right? So a pretty substantial, a 20-ish% decline in terms of young people working. So young people work a lot less. Amongst our, 18 to 22-year-olds, that's our college-aged population, 62% of Gen Zers work, right? So still a good majority. 9% less than millennials, and what is that? 9 plus 8, 17% less than Gen Xers at the same age, but still, a broad majority. So we know that, as we move forward in kind of our generational cohorts, we get our slow life plan, right? SLP. We'll just call it SLP, right? Slow life plan, right? They're moving into some of those things like paid work much more slowly. So, it's still in our 18 to 22-year-olds, 62% work. That's still a majority of them. But there is a pretty solid 38% of them who still aren't working at that age. Now, again, a lot of this is probably going to be at least partially a reflection of more degrees, right? A lot of them are going to be working, probably taking student loans. and they're going to be in university or college, so they won't be working, right? And millennials, somewhat fewer of them went to college. Gen Xers, far fewer of them went to college. Okay. Where do these generations want to work, right? So most of these are pretty minoritarian, but I will say one of the things, and I looked this up last semester just for fun, right now the number one job that every Gen Zer wants to do, does anyone want to guess? Influence, yeah, general influencer. That is the number one job that Gen Zers want to do, is influencer, because we've walked into a dystopian future. No, that's fine. You're all fine. You're okay. Be influencers if you want. Just use your power for good. Or play Fortnite and whine about how this shotgun is worse than the one last season. I don't know. That's how it's going to be. But generally, if we look at kind of the top jobs for Gen Z, right, we see software engineer pretty high. And again, pretty decent median salaries for open jobs. So they're pretty high. Sales associate, medical engineer, right? Pretty high-end jobs are the jobs, the top jobs that Gen Z is applying to, right? So those are the in-demand jobs for Gen Zs, the one that they want and the ones they're training for. But like I said, if you ask them what they want to do, a good number of them want to be influencers. And the top employers of Gen Z workers, are IBM, the gray lady of tech, but still a tech firm. And then all of these are basically tech firms, right? IBM, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and Salesforce, top employers attracting millennials, pretty much the same list, but a slightly different list of tech firms, right? Amazon, IBM, Oracle, Google, Apple, and Microsoft being in the top, right? And then there's a few financial firms here and there. So the places that are attracting the most Gen Z and millennials are mostly in tech. So not surprisingly, as we've shifted to that post-industrial economy and really the internet revolution has taken hold, millennials and Gen Z are shifting into that space as well. And even like an influencer, right, is technically a tech job in some ways. Okay, so what do young people want from work? Again, I'm still suggesting that millennials are kind of on the young side. So what we see, the one that most people said for millennials was a good work environment, great people, great benefits, and life balance. Or top 5, great work, whatever that is. It's not enterprise rent-a-car. Gen Z too wants a great work environment, but they want flexible hours. That's a really interesting one, right? Flexible hours is really important for Gen Z. I'll tell you this, because we were trying to hire at the CCR, we're trying to hire someone who was going to be project manager, or I can't remember what the title we gave. I think it was some kind of project manager position. And we interviewed 3 or 4 people that were clearly Gen Z, and all of them like, hey, do you have any questions for us? It was like, so how often would you say on average we need to come to the office? This was not a good question. We didn't hire any of them because it's sort of an office-based job, but it was pretty clear that they wanted to do all of it work from home. And this is kind of what's in the flexible hours thing, is they wanted flexible. We ended up hiring like a Gen Z lady, or sorry, not Gen Z, a Gen X lady who is here all the time. I think she might sleep here. I don't know. But right, flexible hours are big for Gen Z. Again, as the tech economy becomes more ensconced and COVID really shifted things in terms of work from home, that's what they want. And then obviously good pay, great people who they'll never see because they work from home. Sorry, that's me being a little snarky. And again, flexibility, a flexible schedule, right? That's the other question. It was like, would you say that this is a 9 to 5 job? I was like, no, this is a 7 to 10 job. No, I'm kidding. We didn't say that. It's like you work in the academy. The academy has no set hours. I'm answering emails at like midnight. Like I'm sure people will be doing their exam at 11:30 and being like, something went wrong. And I'll be like, cool. I'm just checking. Nope, no one has emailed me during the course of me lecturing. So we're good. All right. Just so I could tell you. All right, great people, easy job. That actually sounds pretty good. I will say, millennials didn't want an easy job, but they did want laid back, Hawaiian shorts and stuff. Okay, so you kind of get the idea, right? Different kind of orientations. If we wanted to categorize Gen Z, it's probably flexible would be the best one. And then millennials, I guess flexible hours were here too for millennials. I'm being mean to Gen Z, but probably, pay, or I guess workplace, because they care about work environment, great people, great benefits, life balance, great work as kind of their top values. Okay. All right. Fun times. What do they not want? Okay. So I think I inverted these. On this slide, it was millennials on the one side. They're here now. What do they not want? Millennials don't want long hours. Upper management. Oh, I so feel that. Upper management was always the biggest pain in the butt when I worked in industry, because they would stick their nose into things that they didn't know about. Low pay, nobody wants to work for low pay. I guess life balance, I'm assuming that's bad life balance, high turnover, a bad work environment, and all those things. Okay, so those are the cons, right? Cons for Gen Z, same thing, long hours, nobody wants to work long hours, low pay, nobody wants to work for low pay. Minimum wage, obviously, when this was done, and I think this came out of 2019, minimum wage, no one wants to work for minimum wage, and Gen Z was just, a good chunk of them coming into the workplace. Rude customers, I feel that. I got lots of great rude customer stories that I could tell you, but I won't, because they're not germane to this particular conversation. Poor management, right? Nobody likes poor management. Upper management lower than millennials, just because they haven't dealt with it yet. And, they don't want a fast-paced workplace. They want something easygoing and laid back. Okay, so kind of general orientations. And again, this is from this Glassdoor study. Glassdoor.com/research. What millennials and Gen Z want in the workplace. Millennials want a purpose, right? So they're purpose-driven. I'm reading Rick Warren. I don't know. More interested in ongoing conversations than annual assessments. So this tells me, they want, they don't like being judged or rated, but they like people to tell them in a kind of open way. They like open communication and open systems of judging their work rather than, the annual review. I gotta say, annual reviews are a pain. I have to do them. They're annoying. Interested in collaboration and teamwork, right? So they want to work with great people. And increasingly as they get older, view their career as one of the most important things in their life. Gen Z, on the other hand, we're going to change colors. I don't know why. I just feel like it. We're going to go with blue for Gen Z. Money and job security. So they want the monies, right? They're anxious, right? They need frequent feedback on their performance. So Gen Z, and this is, I think, kind of in line with what we know about Gen Z and what we'll see, is they're the anxious generation. They want constant feedback and kind of approval of what they are doing. Driven by individual performance and competition. Screw this teamwork stuff. It's what I'm doing. And prizing a healthy work-life balance. And that's where you see those values like flexibility, right? Flexible hours coming in for Gen Z, right? They want to prioritize their life, right? They want, I don't know, I kind of see this in a lot of that influencer culture, right? Where it's like, I want to do my work, but also to kind of have my life. There's one person I follow who has a rescue husky that yells at her. Levi the Rescue Husky, I think is the name of the channel. And you can see that this is what this person kind of wants, right? She wants to take her dogs on walks and take videos about it. That's what she wants to do for work. Sounds like a pretty good job. Okay. So, what about Gen Z? We're talking about our young cohort. This is a lot of text, I'm sorry. So, about half of Gen Zers say that salary is what they consider most when they are applying for their first full-time jobs, which is, again, I kind of an interesting shift from the past. Like if you had looked at Gen X and millennials, it would have been like, mobility, how much can you move up? And, the quality of experience. But for Gen Z, it's, salary when they're looking for their first job. Gone. Okay, so gone are any sense from Gen Z that they're going to work at one place, right? They want to pursue long-term careers, but for them, careers aren't built in one place, right? It's something that you're going to do, and they kind of expect to do an average of 4 transitions in their professional life. So this, again, is kind of interesting, especially if we can compare it to the boomers. Yes, I'm writing in cursive because it's faster. So take my uncle, for instance. My uncle Dick, he worked at IBM, right? So he got out of the Army. He did his 2 years of service in the Army. And then he went to work for IBM. And he stayed at IBM for 42 years. He worked at IBM for 42 years. And he was like, and he was, without a doubt, what they would call a company man. He had IBM polo shirts and IBM hats and IBM mouse pads. And, in the days before Microsoft Windows won the day, he was running IBM's operating system OS/2 and insisted 15 years later that it was a better operating system than Windows ever was, and that the biggest mistake anyone ever made was going with Windows over OS/2, right? Company man. And that was kind of the model of the boomers, right? Like my dad worked for the Alberta government for 35 years before he kind of went and became a consultant because the government is stupid. He took early retirement from the government and then went back to the work for the government as a contractor at 3 times his wage because the government is stupid. And they were like, yes, we'll let you retire. We have no one else who can do your job. Oh, would you mind coming back as a consultant? Literally 2 months after he left because the government is stupid. Okay, my dad worked for 35 years, right, at the same place. And this was the kind of norm for, like, my mom was a lifelong teacher for the Catholic school board, right? This was the model of the boomers, right? Find a job, a great job with great benefits and maybe a pension, and work there for your whole career, right? And commit yourself to that company because that company is kind of like your family. Now, this breaks down in the 80s a bit, especially for Gen Xers and then for millennials, because there aren't companies hiring them in that same way, right? And you don't expect it. And by Gen Z, right, we're expecting, 4 kind of job transitions on average in their lives. That's what they're expecting, though it probably will be more. Okay, 21%, sorry, that should be 21% of Gen Zers say they want a stable schedule. 23% expected that they would be offered a flexible schedule by their employers, right? So again, you see that value of flexibility, work from home, the shift of technology, and the possibilities that's opened up, for work-life balance and all of those things. I could talk about this because I've taught the class on work and industry a few times. What people tend to think of as a good job is one with very little close supervision, and working from home is no supervision at all. All right, 51% of iGeners or Gen Zers said they would stay at a company if they enjoy the work they do, and 51% said that a competitive salary is also a reason for them to stay, right? So they want to like their work, and they'll stay at a job if they like their work and if the salary is good. All right, so here's our influencers, right? 73% of Gen Zers aspire to turn their hobbies into full-time jobs. And I'll say, I know people like this. One person that before I was full-time in sociology, I worked at St. Joseph's College. And one of the people who worked there, she basically left a salaried position with a pension to go make crocheted things that she sells on Etsy, right? And apparently, I don't know. She said she was doing really well at it, and it was enough money that she felt like she could quit her job, and that's what she really wanted. And she's, very oldest kind of cohort of Gen Z, born like 1995. But yeah, that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to be doing her hobby, right? Her hobby, her passion. I want to chase my passion. You hear that from Gen Z a lot. It's a cool idea. If you can make crocheted chickens and sell them on Etsy for enough money, then more power to you. So yeah, all right. 77% of Gen Zers are more likely to apply to companies that value diversity. So when it's Pride Month, right? We're coming up to Pride Month in June, and you're going to go on social media on X, and everybody's got a rainbow logo, right? Everybody's got the Xbox logo, the Microsoft logo, the Deloitte logo. They're all in rainbow. That's why, right? Because if you want to apply or you want to attract Gen Z employees, you want to signal that you are a diverse workplace, right? Somewhere that values diversity and LGBTQ diversity, really important to Gen Z. So companies are going to start flagging that more and more. We are a diverse workplace. We value diversity. Diversity is our strength, right? All those things you're going to hear lots as Gen Z comes to dominate the workplace more. 3/4 of them revealed that they would like to explore different roles in an organization than switch companies, right? So this is this is a little bit around flexibility. They don't want to be stuck in one role in a company forever. They want to try different things within that company. Okay. A company's impact on society, right? So this is social justice. I'll just put SJ. Not Society of Jesus, but social justice. Sorry, Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. It's a religious order. If you exist long enough in the Catholic space, that's what it means to you. So social justice, really important to Gen Z, right? Especially around things like the environment, right? Climate change and all those things. It will affect their decision to be part of a particular workplace. And 60% of Gen Zers prefer having cool products more as perks than experiences, right? So they want cool stuff. I don't know why that's pertinent, but it's kind of interesting. Okay, how am I doing for time? Better than I thought. Okay, 61% of Gen Zers want to be entrepreneurs over being an employee upon graduating from college. Again, this is a little bit of that flexibility. They want flexibility. They want to work at their own pace, and influencers will fall into this category as well, right? They don't want to work for other people. They want to work for themselves. The only problem with working for yourself is your boss can be a jerk sometimes. All right, 54% of them say they want to start their own companies more than working for one, which is pretty high. Definitely much higher than the boomers. At the same point, most boomers were really wanting to go work for big corporations or for government, but Gen Zers, right, it's all that entrepreneurial spirit. And again, 75, I said that one already, 75% of Gen Zers want to turn their jobs into hobbies, or hobbies into jobs, and all of these things go together, right? This is all kind of one and the same. Okay, so labor markets for young people. Okay, shifting away from what the workplace looks like. So, we talk about kind of youth employment and youth unemployment in particular. One of the things, sorry, this is a bit of a hard jump from the statistics on what young people want to do. One of the things that's true in Canada and the US, and this is true in the UK to an extent as well, is that we tend to have lower youth unemployment, right? So if we talk about Canada, the US, and the UK, youth unemployment tends to be lower. Now that said, it tends to be about 2 times the overall rate of unemployment in Canada and the US. Overall. Right, so let's say in Canada right now, the unemployment rate for overall is about 5.1. You can roughly estimate that the unemployment rate for young people is going to be about 10%, right? Or a little bit over 10%, roughly speaking. And this is pretty consistent, right? In the US, I think the unemployment rate is like 3.5, so you can guess youth unemployment is going to be about 6-7%. In other parts of the world, this is less so. Like, especially in the EU, youth unemployment typically ranges somewhere between about 25 and 60%, depending on where you are. So a lot of this has to do with economic structures. And one of the things that's really difficult when you talk about youth employment in general is that places with what we would say are more flexible labor laws are what's called, do I have it on here? Sorry, I should have written it down here, but it's called at-will employment, right? At-will employment, and this is at the will of the employer, right? So you are working at the will of the employer. So countries like Canada, the US, and the UK have, because they come out of British common law, employment is thought of as at will, like you are hired at the pleasure of your employer. In these systems, right, it tends to be relatively easy to fire someone. So if you've ever started a job, right, you're told that there's a 90-day probationary period wherein, whatever, if your manager doesn't like the cut of your jib, if you've ever wondered, the jib is the front sail on a sailboat. I don't know why I know that. But if they don't like, anything about you, they can fire you without cause after 90 days. These systems, though, tend to have pretty low bars for dismissal even afterwards, right? And it tends to be up to the employee to prove that the dismissal was unfair. And I'll give you an example. One of the first jobs my sister had was working for out of university, was working for a big construction firm. I won't say which one, but it was definitely Leadcore. And she was an engineer, so she was working on average about 60 hours a week, but she really, really did not get along with the manager of her unit. So after about a year, just on a random Tuesday, he handed her a pink slip where it said, you're being laid off for lack of work. Given the fact that she'd worked 62 hours the previous week, she was a bit surprised by this particular, pink slip. And, she went through this process of being like, well, should I file a claim for wrongful dismissal? Because I actually think it's just the manager hates my guts. But when she went and talked to a labor lawyer, they were like, look, you're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars trying to get this judgment. It's better for you just to accept it and move on, right? That, even if you were wrongfully dismissed, they gave you a pink slip that said lack of work, and you would have to somehow prove that they didn't do that. We can do it, but that's going to cost tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees, and it's just not really worth it, right? So in these systems, right, it's really easy to get fired. People can fire you really easily, and it's hard for you to prove things. Now, if we look at places, in other parts of the world, say like France and Germany, they tend more towards these kinds of unemployment rates. So here, 60%, you're talking weird places like Spain, Portugal, my pen is freaking out, and Italy, right? These are the places where we have really high. I guess Greece is the other one. Because people give these places amusing names. Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain. They're the pigs, right? The pigs, the pig countries. Now, those places have very different kind of sets of labor laws. And Germany's kind of, for a long time, evaded this. Now the German economy's sort of on its back, so it's rising in Germany as well. But they have a different system, which is essentially very much union-led, right? So in countries like France, Germany, Italy, it's very difficult to fire someone once they've been hired. So what you tend to get in these places is a much different employment patterns. And again, because young people tend to be seen as a risky investment, you don't know what kind of young worker you're going to get, people will tend just not to hire young workers, right? They're a risk for the employer because once, there's all sorts of weird things. Once you're hired, it's really difficult to fire you, right? So you're almost, in some places, you can stay at that job as long as you want. And in a lot of places, even if you work in, say, a non-unionized industry, you get union type benefits because what the union bargains for, a union workplace gets applied to all similar workplaces. So everybody, even though union participation in France, for instance, is really, really low, a lot of employees in France get union style benefits without belonging to those unions, right? So workers are a much greater risk for employers, which generally leads to less hiring and less expansion in general. So in Canada, the US, and the UK, you're very little risk, right? An employer can hire you, and if you don't work out, they have 90 days to figure that out, so 3 months, which is a long time. And even afterwards, it's pretty easy to get rid of you if they want. So you're very little risk, which means more young people get hired, and the unemployment rate for young people is considerably lower in Anglosphere countries because employers don't have to worry that they're stuck with you forever. In this more kind of European style continental system, young people are a much, much greater risk, and so they tend to be hired less often. Okay. Maybe I'll go a couple more slides because I got 6 more minutes, and then I'll do these quickly, and then we'll let you go for the day and the weekend. And that's weird because I only saw you for an hour today, but whatever, that's life. Okay, so one of the theories that's kind of been proposed about young workers is that they are floundering, right? That they struggle in the job market, particularly because they are young and they have these certain conditions, these certain characteristics. So amongst other things, right? They're not responsible enough when they finish high school or even university to be on the career track, right? And again, partially because we think of them as emerging adults, right? They're not really adults. And so they're interested in partying, traveling, having great experiences, not about building their careers. That's how people tend to think of them, right? They care about their social lives, about partying. I hit my step count. Like, is someone trying to call me? No, I hit my step count. Isn't life grand? They care about their social lives, partying, dating and all those things. And therefore, as a result, they're unreliable, right? They'll call in sick on a Monday because they were hungover on Sunday or they were drinking on Sunday. They tend to jump from job to job, right? They have a short turnaround, and this is what's referred to in industry circles as churn. Right? So people jump from job to jobs. It's like they're being churned through, which means, for employers, constantly training people, right? So young people, if they're jumping from job to job, especially if they get dissatisfied, right? And this is the kind of, something that people talked about with millennials, and they talk about it with Gen Z. If people are a little bit dissatisfied or everything's not to their perfect liking, they'll quit and leave those jobs, which means employers have to train the replacement because of churn. And so employers, a lot of them will say that in terms of their career path jobs, they want to wait until people mature a bit. Okay, so the kind of counter argument to this is actually that and this comes from Chris Tannock, who's one of the people who studied this, is that young people actually, are affected more by the perceptions of employers, which leaves them in a sort of precarious work position, right? Because employers often are like, oh, I want to see someone with experience, right? It's the old, I can't write this down, it's too long. I'll put my pen away. It's the old adage, right? Everybody wants experience, but I can't get any experience because no one will hire me to get experience. And it's the sort of beginner working kind of dilemma, right? Every employer wants experience. You have none, but you can't gain experience because no one will give you a chance. So because no one will hire young people in career path jobs, right? They end up taking McJobs, right? So coming out of university or high school, depending on what your trajectory is, you need to work, right? You need to support yourself somehow. So you take a job, probably in the service industry, which, is what's available to you. And then those jobs stink. Not everyone is like me, kind of a jerk at heart and will never be pushed out of a job if I don't want to leave. People will be like, oh, this job at Starbucks or McDonald's or Ackland's Granger or wherever it is, this entry-level job stinks, and they leave and they kind of churn through different jobs, right? So when you look at their CV, there's this job, that job, this job, that job, relatively short durations. This in itself sort of perpetuates the cycle, and you can call this the McJob cycle, right? You end up in a McJob, it sucks, so you shift off, you still don't have enough experience, so you end up in another McJob, and so on and so forth until the end of time. But what Tannock will say is that the system, right, that basically gives young people few career path jobs to start with is the ultimate cause of this, Because, if you're expecting people to work long-term in really bad jobs, you're sort of deluding yourself. Okay, I'll leave it there because I'm out of time-ish. And I'm sure after all of that, you probably just want, and writing an exam today, you probably all want to go home. So thanks for coming, the people who came, and we'll see you on Monday. We'll keep going with work. After work, I think we're jumping to either religion and spirituality or sex and intimacy, both of which are really fun, I promise. So we'll see you on Monday, and we'll finish this. I think I've only got maybe 5 or 6 slides left, 7 or 8 slides left, 10 or 15 slides left. Whatever we have left, we'll work through it really quick, and then we'll jump into one of the 2 juicier topics in the course. So we'll go from there. All right, we'll see you on Monday, wherein we will be in week 4 of the course, which is crazy.